The tree lights twinkled in the corner of my parents' living room, casting a warm glow across the faces of my family. Christmas had always been a big deal in our household, with elaborate decorations, Mom's traditional turkey dinner, and the not-so-traditional passive-aggressive comments from my older sister Caroline. I was helping my mother set the table when Caroline arrived with her husband Greg and their 2 children. She swept into the dining room wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, air-kissing everyone before pausing to look me up and down. "Well, look who made it out of the city," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We weren't sure you'd join us this year, what with your big, important job keeping you so busy." I returned her smile with a genuine one of my own. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Care. "My name is Mia, and at 32, I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. Our brother Jack lives across the country and rarely makes it home for holidays anymore. That leaves just Caroline and me to carry on the family traditions, a task she takes very seriously, along with the unspoken competition she established between us years ago." Growing up, Caroline was the golden child, homecoming queen, valedictorian, married right out of college to her high school sweetheart. She followed the life plan our parents had always envisioned. Prestigious local university, respectable job at an insurance company, beautiful suburban home with a white picket fence, 2 perfectly timed children. She checked all the boxes. I took a different path. After college, I moved to the city to work for a tech startup. The hours were brutal, the pay initially mediocre, but the potential was enormous. More importantly, I loved the work. For the past 7 years, I had been living in a modest 1-bedroom apartment, pouring myself into my career while Caroline smugly observed my apparent lack of progress from the comfort of her 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. What Caroline didn't know, what none of my family knew, was how things had changed in the past year. The startup I had helped build from the ground up had been acquired by a major tech company. As one of the early employees with equity, I had suddenly found myself with financial security I had never imagined possible. But I hadn't told anyone yet, partly because I was still processing it myself, and partly because I knew Caroline would somehow find a way to diminish my achievement. My apartment, though small, was in a prime location with views of the city skyline. I stayed there not out of necessity but because I loved it. It was close to work, close to my friends, and had become home. I had no desire for a bigger place just for the sake of having more space. Caroline, however, viewed my living situation as evidence of my failure to launch properly into adulthood. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Mom had outdone herself with the food, and Dad was in good spirits, happy to have his daughters home. Caroline's kids, ages 8 and 10, were on their best behavior, enthusiastically describing their school activities and the gifts Santa had brought that morning. Then came the inevitable moment when conversation turned to me. "So, Mia," my father asked, "how's work going? Still at that internet company?" Before I could answer, Caroline jumped in. "It's a startup, Dad, very trendy. Mia's probably the oldest person there by a decade." I smiled tightly. "Actually, we were acquired last year. I'm now technically working for Nextech." The acquisition had been big news in the business world, but my family didn't follow that industry. My mother looked impressed. "That sounds important, dear." "It's just a bigger company," Caroline said with a dismissive wave. "Probably means more bureaucracy, right?" "It has its challenges," I acknowledged, not wanting to get into the details of my new role or compensation package at the dinner table. "Speaking of challenges," Caroline continued, "are you still in that tiny apartment? What is it, like 600 square feet?" 750, actually. God, I can't imagine. We're thinking of adding another 800 square feet to our place just for a proper home gym and office. Aren't you claustrophobic in that shoebox? I took a sip of wine. "It suits me fine." "Must be nice living in that shoebox," she snickered, looking around the table as if inviting everyone to join in her amusement. "I mean, at your age, I already had a house, but I guess not everyone can have it all figured out." The table went quiet. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. My mother shot Caroline a warning look which she either didn't notice or chose to ignore. "We all make choices," I said calmly. "I chose to live close to work." "Or maybe the work chose you," Caroline replied with fake sweetness. "Not everyone can afford options, right?" "Caroline," my mother interjected sharply, "that's enough." But Caroline wasn't done. She had found her target and was warming to her theme. I'm just saying, if Mia ever wants to settle down and have a family, she might want to think about upgrading from a glorified dorm room. No man wants to move into a shoebox. I'll keep that in mind, I said, focusing on cutting my turkey into perfectly even pieces. We should come visit you sometime, Caroline continued, either oblivious to the tension or, more likely, enjoying it, though I'm not sure where we'd all sit. Do you even have a couch, or just one of those futon things college kids use? My father attempted to change the subject, asking about Greg's golf game, but Caroline circled back. We could help you look for a real place, you know. Greg has a friend in real estate who specializes in starter homes. Nothing fancy, just something more adult. I set down my fork, took a deep breath, and smiled. My place is perfect for me, Caroline, but thanks for your concern. The dinner continued, with Caroline making little digs about my lifestyle choices, each comment framed as helpful concern rather than the judgment it really was. I let it all wash over me, responding minimally and pleasantly. This was a familiar dynamic, one I had learned to navigate years ago. Rising to her bait only gave her more ammunition. After dinner, as we were clearing the table, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. I'm sorry about Caroline, she whispered. You know how she gets. It's fine, Mom. Nothing I haven't heard before. Still, she sighed, I wish you two could just get along, like when you were little. The memory of Caroline and me as children building blanket forts and sharing secrets felt like it belonged to different people entirely. Something had changed when we hit our teens. Perhaps it was the natural competition between siblings, perhaps it was Caroline's insecurity, but she had begun to measure her success against my perceived failures. The more I diverged from her chosen path, the more critical she became. As the evening wound down, I noticed Greg had been drinking steadily all night. When it came time to leave, he was in no condition to drive. I'll call an Uber, Caroline said, looking annoyed at her husband. Don't be silly, my mother said. Mia can drive you. She hasn't been drinking much, have you, dear? I hadn't planned on playing chauffeur, but the idea of making Caroline ride in my car suddenly had appeal. Sure, I can drop you guys off. Caroline looked hesitant. We have the kids, and their booster seats are in our car. The kids can stay here, my mother suggested. They've been begging for a sleepover. We'll bring them home tomorrow. With no reasonable objection left, Caroline agreed with visible reluctance. We said our goodbyes, and I walked out to the driveway with Caroline and Greg trailing behind. When I clicked the key fob and the lights of my new Tesla Model S flashed, I heard Caroline's sharp intake of breath. I had picked up the car just 2 weeks earlier and hadn't shown it to my family yet. This is yours? Caroline asked, her voice higher than usual. Yep. I opened the passenger door for her. Got it recently. Greg, despite his intoxication, was instantly animated. Holy shit, this is the Plaid, isn't it? The fast one? He ran his hand along the sleek exterior. It is, I confirmed, helping him into the back seat. Caroline stood frozen on the driveway, staring at the car as if trying to reconcile its existence with her narrative about my life. You coming? I asked. She nodded and slid into the passenger seat, her expression tight. As I pulled out of my parents' driveway, I could feel her gaze darting around the interior, taking in the premium finishes and massive central display. This must have been, at least $100,000? She finally asked, trying to sound casual. More or less. Greg leaned forward from the back seat. The Plaid starts at like 130 plus options. This one's probably closer to 150. He had apparently researched Tesla models extensively. Caroline flinched slightly at the figure. Is this leased? No, I bought it. With what money? The question slipped out before she could stop herself, too direct to disguise as mere curiosity. I glanced at her, then back at the road. The Shoebox pays pretty well, huh? The silence that followed was profound. In my peripheral vision, I could see Caroline's face cycling through expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, the dawning realization that her assumptions about my financial situation had been entirely wrong. Greg, oblivious to the tension, continued to exclaim over the car's features from the back seat. This acceleration is insane. Can you do a launch for us, please? Not with you in this state, I replied. Another time. We drove through the suburbs toward Caroline and Greg's house, the silence between my sister and me growing heavier by the minute. I could almost hear the calculations happening in her head as she tried to reconcile the cost of my car with her image of my struggling financial situation. When we were about halfway to their home, Caroline finally spoke again, her voice carefully controlled. "So, the acquisition, it was a big deal then?" "It was. And they gave you stock options or something?" "Something like that." She fidgeted with her wedding ring. "You never said anything. You never asked." Another stretch of silence followed. We were getting closer to their neighborhood, the streets lined with large, identical houses sporting perfectly manicured lawns. "I don't understand why you still live in that tiny apartment if you can afford," she gestured at the car around us. "Because I like it," I said simply. "It's my home." She seemed genuinely perplexed by this answer. In Caroline's world, financial success was meant to be displayed through ever larger houses, newer cars, and visible luxury. The idea that I might have money and choose not to spend it on expanding my living space didn't compute. As we pulled into their driveway, I noticed Caroline glancing at their house as if seeing it through new eyes. The property that had always been her pride, her evidence of superior life choices, suddenly seemed less impressive in comparison to what she now knew I could afford. Greg fumbled with his seatbelt. "This car is amazing. Seriously, Mia, you've been holding out on us." "Thanks for the ride," Caroline said stiffly as she opened her door. "No problem." Christmas brunch tomorrow?" she asked, an olive branch of sorts. "Mom's making her French toast." "I'll be there." As they walked to their front door, I noticed Caroline look back at my car once more, her expression unreadable in the darkness. I pulled out of their driveway and headed back toward the city, feeling oddly light. For years, I had allowed Caroline's judgment to affect me, had sometimes even doubted my own choices when faced with her certainty about the right way to live. But sitting in my new car, heading back to my beloved apartment, I realized I no longer needed her approval. I was proud of my choices, my career, my life, and for the first time, I had allowed her to see that, even if I hadn't spelled it out explicitly. The next morning, Caroline was unusually subdued at brunch. She watched me thoughtfully over her coffee cup as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. When Mom asked about my apartment, wondering if I might consider moving now, Caroline surprised me. "I think Mia's place is probably perfect for her lifestyle," she said. "Not everyone needs a huge house." Mom looked between us, sensing the shift but not understanding it. "Well, as long as you're happy, dear." Later, as I was helping with the dishes, Caroline joined me at the sink. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she said quietly. "The shoebox comments, that was, unnecessary." Coming from Caroline, this was the equivalent of a groveling apology. I handed her a plate to dry. "It's okay." "No, it's not." She focused intently on wiping the plate. I haven't been very supportive of your choices." "You made different ones, that's fine." "But I acted like mine were better." She set the plate down carefully. "I think maybe I've been a bit insecure." This frank admission was so unexpected that I nearly dropped the glass I was washing. Caroline had never, in all our years of subtle competition, admitted to insecurity. "Your life seems so exciting," she continued. "The city, the startup, all of it. Greg and I, we just did what was expected. Sometimes I wonder..." She trailed off, but I understood what she wasn't saying. For all her outward confidence, Caroline had her own doubts about her choices, just as I sometimes had about mine. "Different paths work for different people," I said gently. "You have a beautiful family, a nice home. That's success too." She nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't rubbing her nose in the reversal of our perceived financial situations. "So, the car," she said, changing the subject slightly. "It's really something. Want to go for a proper drive later? I can show you what it can do." Her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I'd like that." As we finished the dishes side by side, I felt the tentative beginnings of a new dynamic between us. Not instant best friends, not completely free of our history, but perhaps moving toward a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. The Tesla had been an unexpected catalyst, breaking through years of assumptions and forcing a new perspective. But the real change was in me. I had finally stopped seeking Caroline's approval and started living on my own terms, confident in my choices regardless of what anyone else thought of them. After brunch, I took Caroline for that drive, showing her just what the Tesla could do on a stretch of empty highway. Her delighted laughter as we accelerated from 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds was the most genuine emotion we'd shared in years. "Okay, I get it now," she said as we cruised back toward our parents' house. "Why you love the city, why you took the risk with the startup. It paid off." "It did," I agreed. "But even if the acquisition never happened, I'd still be happy with my choices. I love my work, my friends, my apartment." She was quiet for a moment, contemplating this. "I envy that certainty," she finally admitted. "Knowing you made the right choice for you, not just the choice everyone expected." It was the most honest conversation we'd had in our adult lives, not a complete resolution of our complicated relationship, but a beginning. A recognition that success and happiness take different forms for different people, and that neither of us had the market cornered on making the right life choices. As for the Tesla, it remained a silent but potent symbol between us, a sleek metal reminder that appearances and assumptions are often misleading. I didn't regret buying it, and I certainly didn't regret the look on Caroline's face when she first saw it, but I was more grateful for the conversations it had prompted, the new understanding it had facilitated. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't about hurting the other person, but about proving to yourself that their judgment never mattered in the first place. My sister had mocked my apartment, my lifestyle, my choices, but in the end, I was the one who got to drive away, content in the knowledge that I had built exactly the life I wanted. Caroline had her perfect suburban existence, and now she knew I had what I wanted too. Different paths, different choices, both valid. Perhaps that realization was the greatest gift we could have given each other that Christmas, far more valuable than anything wrapped under the tree.